Okay, well, I want to welcome everyone, give a brief welcome to start things off, and truly to thank you for attending this workshop panel on, well, the experience of graduate study, from making the decision to apply to the intellectual and emotional, but also the political challenges of pursuing the degree. And while you'll hear about the different services on campus and how things are organized, the main thing will really be to hear from current students about how they're experiencing their degrees, and truly the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. So that's by way of welcome and thanks. I would, however, like to remind everyone that as this event is virtual and we're not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you're currently on. We ask that if this is the case, that you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders, and to think seriously about what that means in terms of the past, the present, and the future. We recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The university acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So, I am Dean Tom Loebel, Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies and Associate Vice-Provost Graduate at York. And I'd like to ask Tracy and Eileen to introduce themselves from two different areas across campus to share a bit about their own unique roles at York and how it impacts on this event.
Sure. Tracy, would you like to go first or would you like me to?
Sure, you can go first, please.
Okay, so my name is Eileen Watson, and I am the Graduate Recruitment Officer here at York. So essentially, I work with students or potential students who are interested in applying to graduate studies at York in all programs and faculties except the Schulich School of Business and Osgoode Law. So any questions about York as an institution, graduate studies, how to apply, application materials, any of that, anything to do with applying to grad at York. That's me.
Tracy, what about you?
Thank you for that. So I'm Tracy Jacko, and I am the Indigenous Recruitment Officer here at York University. So almost exactly the same as what Eileen does. I do work for all programs here at York, undergraduate, graduate, access programs, mentorship, anything that has to do with York, you name it. I'm your main connection to the Indigenous students on campus, Indigenous student support services, and everything else that's Indigenous related. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. I've been in this role for over 15 years, so I'm thoroughly enjoying the position, and I look forward to working with any prospective students that we have out there today. Thank you.
Great. Now, by way of sort of an agenda for this workshop panel, I think we want to start by first learning a bit more about grad studies at York University in general, but then especially the supports and the services offered through the Center for Indigenous Student Services. And personally, I have been so appreciative of having the center quite close by to the Faculty of Graduate Studies. It's its own unique space and a real team of people that we work with, the students work with, quite different from the main beast of central services. So it's wonderful to have a unique Center for Indigenous Student Services. Then we'll have a panel discussion with current scholars who will be sharing their experiences with a lot of time for question and answers from the audience. So it'll become interactive. Eileen, do you want to kick us off with a little bit more about what grad school is all about, who qualifies, etc.?
For sure. So I will try and get through my part as quickly as possible, because truly the best part of this event is hearing from our current graduate students. So I will share a small PowerPoint presentation just to make sure that everyone is on the same page about what grad studies is, eligibility, funding, finances, etc. So as I just said, my name is Eileen. I'm the Graduate Recruitment Officer at York. So I help with admissions for any program except Schulich Business and Osgoode Law. Before I go into more information about what grad is, I wanted to give a disclaimer or an information note that York waives the graduate application fee for all Indigenous applicants. So this is through self-identification. There is no paperwork or proof required. It is self-identification. You email us and we will facilitate the application when you are ready to apply. So if you are thinking of grad school and finances are potentially a barrier, we hope to remove some of that with this fee waiver. So please forgive me if I'm telling you something you already know. It's just a baseline to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So master's degrees are the next available level of university education available after a bachelor's or an undergraduate degree. A master's full-time is usually between 1 to 2 years. Part-time, it usually takes double a full-time degree. And masters typically come in one of 3 formats: coursework only, major research project, or thesis. So a coursework only master's, you would do approximately 8 graduate level courses, and then that's it. You're done, you graduate. Major research project format, you're looking at approximately 6 graduate level courses, and then a small research project. May not feel small, but a small research project. And then thesis-based programs are usually 4 courses total throughout your degree, and then a large research project. Some programs offer all 3 formats and it's your choice. Others, it's a choice between 2, and others are only offered in 1 format. So if you wanted to do like a Master's of Science in Biology, they only offer thesis-based programs. But if you wanted to do a Master of Environmental Studies, they offer all 3. So some programs offer formats outside of the traditional structure, like say social work, which has practicum placements. But for the most part, you're looking at these 3 options. And so definitely not just a continuation of your undergraduate degree where you take X number of courses, to graduate. It's usually you're doing a combination of work and research, or coursework and research. So then there are PhD or doctoral degrees, PhD and doctoral being interchangeable terms. Usually a full-time PhD will take between 4 and 6 years. However, it could take much longer if you're studying part-time or if you're doing intense research. For almost every York program, you need to have your master's before you go into your PhD. Most PhD programs follow the same format or a similar format. You come into the program, you take courses in your first and second year, then you write a qualifying or a comprehensive exam, and then it's years and years of research. So the amount of time it takes to do a PhD really dependent on the amount of time it takes to do your research. So why would someone pursue graduate school? Tons of reasons, some of them personal, some of them external, but career advantages. So with someone with a graduate degree has a higher rate of employment and higher salary rates within that employment. Development of skills for your chosen career. You can see we've listed all of these here. Personal advantages, learning, growing, engaging in a community, which may well be your community, friendships, relationships, freedom that the academic work can bring at the graduate level that it maybe didn't at the undergraduate level. Academic advantages, so contributing to the advancement of knowledge, becoming an expert in a field, answering a specific research project or, research question, or doing a particular research project you're really interested in, but maybe there's no other framework that you're able to do it in. But whatever your reason for pursuing graduate school, we want to emphasize a couple things. Most programs are 100% funded, so you wouldn't end up paying tuition, and you would most likely have money left over after paying tuition. Degrees, especially if you only choose to do a master's, are, on the grand scheme, a low time commitment. So our shortest master's is 8 months and the longest is 2 years. And we do have a unique admissions process for non-traditional applicants. So especially for Indigenous folks, examples that would be pertinent would include if someone is an Indigenous elder who does not have any post-secondary education whatsoever, their experience as an elder, they could apply directly to graduate school without a degree. If someone had a 3-year degree, but experienced in a certain field or lived experience, even though that doesn't necessarily meet the stated requirement, they could go through a unique admissions process and still be admitted to a program on the strength of things other than a degree. So when we talk on these next slides about eligibility, if you're thinking on paper, I don't meet that, speak to us, speak to your graduate program, because it may just be that you can apply anyway, or you can apply still and be accepted on your own personal strengths. So eligibility to do a master's, the stated eligibility is to have an honors undergraduate degree. So that's if you're studying full-time, it's 4 years. If you're a York undergraduate student, it's the 120 credit degree option. And we look at your GPA or your grade point average from your last 2 years of study. So we look for a B+, which is 77%, 7 on the 9-point scale, 3.3 out of 4. It varies. If you're questioning, I'm going to a different school, this is my GPA, we can absolutely talk about that. To go into a PhD program, you're required to have a master's degree except for mechanical engineering. And we look for grades. Some programs accepted a B+, others look for an A- or above. And for PhD admission, we look at your master's grades. So again, these are the stated eligibility requirements, but if you have a unique profile, a unique background, you can absolutely still apply and be accepted and be successful in a program. Paying for graduate school. So we'll talk about tuition and then we'll talk about funding in a minute. So I should say that Indigenous graduate applicants or students who are living in what is now known as Canada or the United States qualify for domestic tuition. So we honor the J Treaty, and again, self-identification, you would be charged domestic tuition fees and be considered a domestic student. So for the vast majority of both master's and PhD programs, tuition per year right now is $5,163.39 per term if you're a full-time student, or $2,581.59 per term if you are a part-time student. There are a handful of programs where the master's tuition is more, so we could certainly talk about that, but all PhDs cost the same. So this is the cost to attend. But what a lot of people don't know is that graduate school is funded. So it's very, very common for a program to, at any school in the country really, to give out funding packages or to support you financially in some way as a full-time graduate student. So I'm going to go over York's specific funding commitments on the next slide, and then other financial supports further. Okay, so our standard funding packages, and again, because an Indigenous student would be a domestic student, paying domestic tuition fees, our standard package for a master's domestic student is $11,000 a year. If you're in a 2-year program, you'd be looking at $11,000 per year. It certainly could be more than this. The way funding works is that you don't apply for it. When you apply to a program, you are automatically applying for a funded spot. So in your offer letter, it would say, congratulations, you've got a spot in this program. Here's how much money we would give you to study with us. So this is not money at the master's level that you would have to pay back. You do not have to work for it. It's not based on financial need or grades. So it's just money you get to be a full-time student, engaged and progressing in your program. For a PhD funding package, the basic amount is $24,455 per year, and it goes up a bit in your upper years of your PhD. Similar to the master's, you do not have to apply for this money. You don't have to pay it back. It's not based on financial need or grades, but there is usually at the PhD level a work component. So a funding package would be made up of grants or money that is given to you, and a guaranteed job as a teaching assistant. So you could certainly get more at either the master's or the PhD level, but again, you would find out in your offer letter. You do not have to apply for this money. Can't stress that enough. It's automatic. Only for full-time students, though. If you're studying part-time, then there's no funding available. I do have a full list of scholarships and bursaries. I won't go through them directly or specifically. We can email out this PowerPoint to everyone who registered for the session. The difference I just want to highlight is that scholarships, bursaries, and other financial assistance require an application. So there's government awards, there's institutional York awards, then there's bursary programs, which are financial need based, but all of these require an application. Sometimes they're based on grades, sometimes it's research ideas, and I've put Inspire at the bottom as well. There's a list specifically for Indigenous graduates or students and graduate students. In terms of a timeline for graduate studies, most programs work on the same timeline every year. So let's say the next session available for most programs is fall or September 2024. So in October of 2023, applications will open on the 15th. So a full 11 months before you'd start a program, the apps are open. Due dates will be between December and March. Decisions will come out usually between February and June. July and August, you connect with the program, attend orientation, register for courses, and then September, school starts. So that's the same every year. There's a handful of programs that do January and May entry, but it's really uncommon. So really that's it in terms of the presentation. I've put York's social media channels on here. Those of you joining us from YouTube will already know that our channel is what it is, but we do have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And then again, our contact information, the fgsnews@yorku.ca. Anyone who is Indigenous with any questions whatsoever, especially about the fee waiver, please email at any time. Happy to speak with you, happy to meet with you. So, and again, we will send this presentation out to everyone who registered, so you can have a look at it. It will also be on the recording as well. So now I think I hand it over to Tracy.
Thank you so much, Eileen. That was really informative, and I hope everyone took some really great notes. So what I'm going to chat about right now is the Center for Indigenous Student Services. So this is the office that I work through. And basically what we are is your home away from home, your physical space on campus where you will build your Indigenous community. So we do a lot of very great things throughout the year. We have our very own orientation that we host for new students. We have additional supports for Indigenous students like support services, access to financial aid, cultural supports, spiritual supports, professional counseling, photocopying, things like that. All those things that you don't really think about right now when you're considering graduate studies, but we still exist there. So we do have 2 locations on campus at York University. We are located in the York Lanes department on the 2nd floor. So within our space there, that's where we have our physical offices with a small student lounge as well. So students can come in, do some homework, access the internet, utilizing our computers. We also provide like a laptop lending program for any students who may need that support. And just that space for you to come in and build your community, interact with additional Indigenous students on campus, and basically find, your safe space here. We also have another location on campus called the Skenagoa Gamig. It's basically 2 words from the Mohawk and Indigenous language. So this space is an activity space that we do host a number of different activities as well. So throughout the year, our cultural programmer hosts several workshops there. We have guest speakers that come in from all across Canada to come in and, talk about different topics, sessions, you name it, we cover that there. So all in all, our space is for Indigenous students who are looking to pursue those support services. And we just want to make sure we provide that link to the Indigenous community for all students studying at York University. So again, my name is Tracy Jacko. I'm the Indigenous recruiter. And if anybody has any questions about, the supports that we have, I invite you to check us out on the internet. We do have an Indigenous application policy where we will consider additional information for students, as Eileen mentioned, and I can help advocate for that as well. So any questions that you may have in terms of the academic programs or Indigenous supports on campus, please reach out to me. I'm happy to work with you. If you're ever in Toronto, want to come around and just check out the campus and visit some of the departments, I can hook that up for you as well. So it's basically in your hands. Send those questions, send those emails, make those phone calls, and get involved with us ASAP, because we'd love to have you on campus. So again, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Now it's my honor to introduce our panelists who have been really generous with their time today. So first off, we have Amy Hull, who I guess downplayed her bio for the sake of brevity and modesty, but Amy Hull is a current PhD student in communication and culture and a graduate of the MA in dance and a BFA in dance, those dance programs. Her research focuses on the imagined, curated, narrativized, and choreographed Indigenous death in Canadian media and culture. We also have Chandra Maracle, pursuing a PhD in environmental studies. Chandra was born and raised on the west side of Buffalo, and I have to call out, this is my stomping ground as well. Yay, Buffalo. She's the mother of 4 daughters. She studied at SUNY Cortland College, the University of Buffalo, and the University of Salamanca, Spain. She's worked as a youth leader and Native American community services worker in Buffalo, has been a graduate assistant in Native American Studies at UB and cultural resource specialist at the Native American Magnet School, number 19. She was a diversity educator with the National Conference for Community and Justice, co-founder of the Indigenous Women's Initiative, and has certifications in eating psychology, massage, Reiki, and yoga. She is the co-founder and nutritional motivator of what in English is called the Everlasting Tree School. Chandra, do you want to come on speaker and provide it in the Indigenous language?
Sure. It's Skoroyaze Goa, Jodala Guns Goa, Giundawi Dakwa.
Thank you. I mean, otherwise everyone would have heard it in my sort of grade 4 bad pronunciation. I think it's important to hear it properly pronounced.
Sure. And the nutrition program is
Thank you. So she has been a collaborator on the Healthy Roots Committee at Six Nations and developed the Haudenosaunee Food Guide for the Community Challenge. And she is founder of, as she just enunciated, what in English is the Real People Eat Real Food, exploring links between people, food, mothering, homemaking, art, language, technology, and land. She is a graduate of the Adult Mohawk Language Immersion Program and is currently a PhD student at York University in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. She lives on Six Nations and Grand River Territory. Lance Morrison, currently an MA in Interdisciplinary Studies at York. Lance Morrison, and I'm going to try it, Lance, but Kiwetinotok Piaso is an unapologetic Nihio and Métis man with Chilcotin, Haida, Secwepemc, and settler Scottish ancestry living in Toronto. He's a grad student, teacher, researcher, academic, writer, storyteller, activist, dog lover, video game character, shit disturber, and pretty decent bannock maker. He is passionate about sharing the stories of Indigenous people through various forms, whether it's academic, writing, research, life writing, plays, or orally sharing around a fire. His stories and research also unveil the truth that Canadians don't want to see. Finally, we have Terry Jones, currently MFA in film production. Terry Jones is a graduate student at York pursuing the MFA in film production. Many of his short films have screened in festivals around the world and have won awards, including his short doc, Soup for My Brother, being named Best Documentary at the 2016 Liverpool Festival. Terry is originally from the Seneca Nation of Indians, who are located about 30 miles south of Niagara Falls. Terry enjoys sharing his Haudenosaunee history and culture through his film, media works, presentations, and food tastings. So it's a wonderfully diverse bunch of people, and please join me in welcoming them to this event. Now, we sort of have three themed questions really to ask each of you, just to start the discussion going. We'll spend about 10 minutes per topic. And I'll say them now, or repeat them individually, but we want to learn a little bit more about how did you come to graduate school? Like, how did you learn about graduate school? And why did you decide to go? Like, what was alluring? What was scary? What did it seem the prospects would be? But then we want to get at your actual experience, even from experience applying. Do you have any tips, for students in the future when they've made the decision, then they think about applying, which is often a strange hurdle, to many students. It's like, what do they want? What are they asking for? And then finally, getting into the details of your experience in the program. And as I said at the opening, like, what's been good, but what's been not easy, like not good. Because it isn't, magic and roses once you get in. There are real challenges that happen, and overcoming those challenges is part of what can make something very good happen to you, for you in graduate school. So those are the three areas. So it gives you a chance to think. But back to the beginning, for each of you, relatively rapid fire. How did you learn about grad school? Why grad school? Why did you decide to go? So let me start with, I'm just looking at Amy, who's beside me. So let's start with Amy.
Right. Okay. So I also have a dog laying across my keyboard right now. So if anything happens, That's what happened.
Yay.
Yay. But yeah, I didn't know what graduate school was when I arrived in Toronto for my undergraduate degree. I had no idea. There was only one person in my family that had ever done graduate school, and I didn't know what it was because we weren't very close, and she actually passed away last year, so I haven't been able to ask her for any advice. That was my cousin's wife. So I'm the only one right now. But yeah, I didn't know what it was, but I arrived actually in Toronto for my audition for the dance program. And I met Dr. Patrick Alcedo, and he explained to me what, well, to everyone, what graduate school was and what he did. And I was like, oh my God, I want to be Patrick when I grow up. So that to me was like when I really learned exactly what that was. And well, not exactly, but generally that was something that I wanted to do because I had met the coolest person I'd ever met in my life. And I was like, I need to be exactly like them and I need to learn how to do that. So essentially from my first year of my undergraduate degree, I was planning ahead to apply to my master's program and apply eventually to a PhD program.
Can I ask very quickly, like what did he say that helped differentiate grad from undergrad? Because most people think I'm going to go to university and that's undergrad. But what did you see in him that suggested the difference of grad school?
I can't remember exactly how he phrased it because we spent the whole day, learning choreographies from different people and then performing them and then doing a class with like all different professors. But I remember him showing us videos of his work. And then he taught us Philippine folk dance. And he was explaining his journey through school. And he kind of, what I assume he did was he probably broke it down and like explained like, and here's how I got to be able to be this kind of person and do this kind of thing. And I was like, that's it. I know what I'm doing now. I had no idea before, but now I do.
I love it. What about you, Chandra?
Wait, what's been the word doing? So I decided to go to grad school for my PhD to take a break from parenting for 25 years. Arguably the easier thing to do is get a PhD than to raise 4 children.
Wow.
So I did my master's work in my 20s and I never thought I'd go back to school again. I certainly did not have any intention to do so. I just, wanted to have a family and then I would figure it out from there. And it just so happened that a retired professor from the department that I'm now in showed up at Six Nations one day at my friend's greenhouse, and we just kind of struck up a conversation. And I told her about the community work that I'm doing. And she just said, why are you not in a PhD program? You're already doing this work. So she kind of put that bug in my ear, but I really didn't think I would ever do it. And then a few years went by and I realized that my youngest daughter was getting older and that I was going to have to decide what I wanted to do next with my life. And I thought, okay, well, if I can make it work for me, like where I'm not going to go into any more debt, then fine, I'll do that before, pursuing something else. So it really kind of just was a fateful day that I met this woman. Her name is Deb Barnt, and she's now a retired professor in environment and urban change, still doing amazing work. And she reeled me in, and it just kind of went from there. From there, it was very easy.
I'm wondering, Lance, whether you will continue this theme of the importance of personal connection and people talking about their journey to ignite the imagination of what your journey might look like, or not. Do you have a different route in?
Well, hearing all this, the previous stories and other times I've been on panels like this, I'm starting to think that the only reason somebody does graduate studies is because they're inspired by somebody to do it. Because like everyone else, I had no intentions. I went, I'm a recovering hairstylist. I'm a recovering fundraiser. I've done all sorts of different careers. So I'd never done university though. I'd done college. I'd done a university certificate in the early 2000s, but I was 36 when I started my undergrad. 36, 38. I can't remember, 38, I think, when I started my undergrad. And I had only intended to do a 3-year degree. I'm very passionate about revitalization of ceremonies and culture and language. And that's kind of the area I wanted to work in, but those jobs are kind of difficult to find. So I thought, well, I should just get an undergrad anyway and be done with it. So my intent was the 3-year, just 3 years and done, like get it out of the way so I have a piece of paper. And it was about 2 months into my undergrad, one of my profs and I were having a coffee, and she was saying like, oh, well, I was thinking about my end of year project, the final project for that first year intro course. And I was like, this is my idea. She's like, no, that's your PhD dissertation. I'm like, I'm not doing that. And she's like, yeah, you are. I'm like, no, I'm done in 3 years, girl. Like, I'm not doing a PhD. And then about a month later, as I was getting more into it and talking to another person who's now a York prof, Jesse Thistle, and him and I had become friends. And so we were chatting, and he's like, yeah, when you do your PhD, blah, blah. I'm like, no. And then I'm like, over the semester break in December that year, I was like, well, let me look at it, and talked it over with my partner. And my partner's like, we can't afford, like, I can pay for you to go to school for 3 years, but I can't do this 10-year PhD. And I'm like, no, it's all like the stuff that Eileen was talking about. I'm like, this is funded and this is that and all these things. And my partner's like, oh, if you're getting paid, then go ahead. As long as I don't have to pay all the bills for 10 years. So I'm like, okay, cool. So then it was really by January of the first year of my undergrad that I decided that I was just gonna finish my undergrad, do a master's, do a PhD, and become a prof. And that's just what my plan was going to be. So again, it was because of Dr. Maggie Court and Jesse Thistle that they just basically told me I was doing it. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I will then.
No, that's amazing. And we are going to have, I hope we'll get into the reality around some of the finances, because it isn't all that easy. It's funded, but it's not, you still have to be very careful, with finances. But Terry, how did you think about this decision? Why grad school? How did it appear on your horizon? And what was the decision making to apply?
Growing up on my territory, I think it could be relatable to other territories. I did all the things of little Indian boys didn't do, or Native kids didn't do. I love math, science, English, social studies. I didn't feel different, and I made a little short film about it called Entitled Unlabeled. I said, I never felt like I was different when I was younger. I was told I was different. But I had, looking back on it, I had all these mentors that were looking at me, educators who were like trying to get me to go to like a private high school and saying, you have potential, you have potential. But I couldn't wait to get out of off territory. The outside world was so interesting to me. So I graduated high school a year early, went to New York City, did a failed attempt at a business degree, did a lot of young things in New York when I was younger. And then in 2012, I applied to Syracuse University and got into their Haudenosaunee Promise Scholarship program. They, like York, acknowledge that we predate the border. So any Haudenosaunee student who gets accepted in Canada or US gets a full scholarship. I took full advantage of that opportunity. I came into the program. They said, you're a freshman. And they said, we'll give you an apartment, on-campus apartments. I'm like, good, I'll just treat it like a artist residency. So I studied 2 summers in Italy. I studied at the FAMU Film School in the Czech Republic. I studied a semester in LA. Out of 600 students in my college, I graduated first in my class. But after I graduated, 13 of my course assignments at Syracuse went into screen over 100 times in film festivals throughout the world. I wanted to go right into grad school after I graduated in 2016, but I didn't. But there were 3 things that made me think about York. For one thing was while Cornell had outreach to me to possibly recruit me, but they didn't have a film production MFA. They only had cinema and media studies. The second thing was one of my short films got into Imaginative, and it screened before a feature documentary. And I forget what her name is, but she was an alumna from the MFA program at York. So I'm like, let me look into that. And Soup for My Brother, which you mentioned earlier, screened at Imaginative. And the day after that, the Canadian Filmmakers Distribution Center approached me to be my distributor. So one thing I forgot, and at Cornell, even though they didn't have the film studies program, the head of the film program, she said, don't go to the States for your MFA. If you're going to do your MFA in film, either go to Canada or go to New Zealand, because that's where it seems like Indigenous storytelling filmmaking was happening. And yeah, so that's how I ended up choosing York. Going to Canada just seemed like a natural fit.
Okay, maybe not for this panel, but at some point you'll tell me how the math science student became the filmmaker. I want to know that story. So just take a minute, each of you, especially for the audience, knowing who our audience is, talk about the application process. I mean, wanting to go to grad school is one thing, and then everything else is about practicalities. What was the application process like for you? Did you have to write anything for it? Just briefly, what was your relation to it? And I'll mix it up a bit. Let me start with Chandra, and then I'll surprise the rest of you.
I think it was pretty standard. Like, had to do the application, had to probably write some kind of personal statement, I think, which, not that it was easy, but because for me, I was in my, let's see, I'm 50 now, so this was a few years ago. So, I mean, I had so much to write about because I had a lot of life experience. So a lot of that part was easier for me, I think, with the application. The toughest thing I had was finding a recommendation from grad school at UV, because I had to get quite an old person to write my recommendation, because a couple of the other guys had died. And the oldest guy was in his 90s, but he did it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's
so it worked out okay.
That point is really important to bring up, and it's partly why we have a unique admit process, because recommendations, what if you were, I don't know, Amy, tell me about your undergrad here. Like, did you know your professors enough to get recommendations?
I knew all my professors
Good.
very, very, very well. So it really was not a problem to get any recommendations. The problem from going to undergrad to master's in the same department was that there were some requirements for writing samples to apply to the master's program, and that were like, it has to be a certain number of words, and 2 of them. So like 2,500 word page paper or something like that. And we had never written a single one in the undergrad program that was that long. So I had to bang out 2 writing samples that I'd never written something that long before in terms of that. But like my application process to the PhD was much more chaotic because I was meeting with a professor in the dance department. And I was like, I was rejected from the University of Toronto. I don't know what to do. Next year, I'm going to cry. And she was like, well, let's see what programs in other universities are still accepting applications. And she's like, oh, look, ComCult between York and TMU. Applications close in 2 days. Let's do this. So I don't know what I did, but I got accepted. I just slammed it in. I don't know what I said.
Scary, but amazing, but really important for people to hear that if there's still an opportunity, grab it. And there may be things in the application which, I don't know, might seem daunting, but try it. The 500-word essay, or 5, however long it was, do it. And if you have somebody who can help, or if there's a writing center or parents, friends as a sort of audience, a test audience, use them. Don't let that be don't let the fear be a barrier. I guess I should have asked Lance, who was the one who said, I'm just going for a 3-year BA. What about recommenders? Did you know people well enough to be recommenders for the process?
Similar to Amy, I had a very good relationship with pretty much every prof that I had in my undergrad. So it wasn't that difficult to get recommendations. The thing for anyone applying to grad school, the advice I will give you is lie to your profs. If your deadline is February 28th, tell them it's February 15th.
Oh, yes.
They are going to submit it on February 14th. They're like I only needed 2. I thought I needed 3. So I asked 3 people and all of them on the very last day. And so I'm sitting there like, oh, these are due in like 3 hours. Like if they don't get them in 3 hours, I don't go to grad school. They all did in like the last 2 hours. You know, the stuff that profs tell students not to do, it's what they do quite often. So yeah, ask for them early, ask for them way in advance. Even if you say like, oh, can you get it to me a month early just so I can make sure the 2 aren't saying the exact same thing so we can kind of edit them so that they're stronger, as opposed to just saying, here's the thing, or here's the deadline, please do it. But with the rest of the application process, for me, and similar with Amy, but I don't believe with the other 2, Amy and I started our undergrad the same year, so we've known each other for years. Okay. But because we both went York to York, so certain things like getting your transcripts was pretty easy. Like it's all the same system, so we didn't have to do that. If you were going from, you know, Syracuse University to York, you might need to get those processes started, all the documentation you need. Beyond the recommendation letters, you might want to get all of that, not stressing at the last minute, dealing with mail strikes and stuff like that. You can just get them all as early as possible. So yeah, it's another recommendation.
It's a great point to stress. And that is a good segue, Terry. Was it, you know, when you're applying to York, was it odd, weird, anything to sort of put on the radar of the audience to think about?
The one thing I did do 2 years ago was I watched this panel from 2 years ago, which was really informative. Coming from the States, I really didn't know. I thought the deadline was, I think the deadline's earlier for international students. And from what I understood on the film program, they only accepted really generally 1 international student, I think it said on the website. So I thought I was vying for 1 spot, but then once I got in, and I think I talked to Eileen, I was told that identifying as being Indigenous would allow me to be a domestic applicant. But going through the application process, first, I was the first one in my family to go to university. My mom went to residential school. My dad, I think, only went to 8th grade, 9th grade. So, you know, it wasn't instilled in me in terms of higher education, but I thought going to grad school was just taking 2 more years of you know, classes. But once I got in, once I did this YouTube webinar, I went on to York's website and I looked at all the faculty, and I was really impressed by the range of the faculty in terms of filmmaking, experimental, documentary, narrative. Like it was all there. Then when I started to apply, I did reach out to my to prior professors at Syracuse University. They were more than ready to recommend me. The head of the film department wrote my 1 letter recommendation, and academic professor in history at Syracuse wrote the other one. And I think my somebody in the film program at York said, just so you know, the film recommendation, you know, was really beautiful. So they had really nice things to say for me.
Good.
Yeah, but for the most part, it was the one thing I did use other professors at Syracuse was to help me refine my statement of interest. They helped me with my undergrad. I was in the honors program. They helped me with my thesis paper then. So they were just like a great reader, giving me feedback, refining. I think I had way too many words and had to refine it down, but yeah.
Well, it's a good point, because when you apply to an undergrad, you're thinking about the university, the courses you want to take, maybe your high school average is the scary thing. Whereas for grad school, in a research type program, and there's research creation in fine arts, you generally have to write a statement of what you're interested in developing, creating, following. And that's part of the application. And it's different for grad school. It has that focus about what you want to create. And it may be the first time you've had to put it down on paper. Yeah, it's a different element of the application. So let's get into the experience of graduate school itself. I don't know, Amy, you start us off. Was it? I have a feeling you're going to tell me it was all wonderful.
Clearly, I'm still at York, so. Sorry, my dog's very ferocious, but
Oh.
yeah, I was actually just talking to my cousin who's in an MA program at York about this like 2 days ago, so it's very fresh in my mind to talk about our experience that we share, which is that so neither one of us have a research project about Indigenous people or Indigenous communities. Mine, like, you know, I definitely involve the concept of Indigenous people, but really it's not anything to do with real Indigenous people. But her research is actually about like ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And we face a lot of discomfort and a lot of pushback about the fact that as Indigenous students, we are not researching Indigenous people, communities, in Indigenous methodologies from an Indigenous research paradigm. So I feel like for me, like reflecting on my whole journey, that's been, even since my undergrad, it has been the main area that I've like faced some challenges, is not only like convincing people that no, I don't have to do research on Indigenous people if I don't want to, but also that like, no, my project is not about Indigenous people, even though you've like read all my papers, you still don't understand that my project is not about Indigenous people. So I think like, yeah, we were just like chatting about that in the middle of the night the other day, like, isn't it so annoying? No matter how many times you say what you're doing, they decide that because you're an Indigenous student, this is what you're doing and you have to do it this way. Yeah, but the experience otherwise, yeah, sunshine and roses. This is what I love.
Except for the pervasive stereotype that keeps dogging you, pun intended, this dog is something else.
Oh, she's
She wants your attention more than anyone else. But I mean, it's a good way to start it off, because that's a and perhaps not what people were thinking. That one of the challenges was, facing people's adherence to a stereotype or a piece of a stereotype, and that's not what you want to do. You wanted to do this other thing. So kudos on that, but it takes some strength. Shaking it up. Let me go back to Terry. Your experience.
Good, great. I feel really well supported by the program, and especially the faculty. My cohorts, I think there's 18 of us. We come from very diverse background. Brazil, Colombia, Iran, Israel, all over. It's all over the world. So it's really great. It's a really great environment. And as we got further into term one or winter term or fall term into winter term, we started acting each other's projects. We were giving feedback on our funding applications. We were there to socialize as well. Felt really well supported. I actually applied. I did a research trip to New Zealand. One of my films got into the Maoriland Film Festival. So in March, I applied to the Academic Excellence Fund. So they paid for my airfare, which was great. But that all relates back to, really comes down to is my research, which was really refined in my first term. It's historical trauma in Indigenous cinema. And it's not just cinema. I'm also realizing it's VR, it's AR. But I love the classes that I've taken. I did a class in directing new narratives, screenwriting class, and future cinema, where I actually taught myself to use Blender and create 3D and Haudenosaunee 3D objects. It's great. I've had a really really great time. One of the challenges that I've had though, both my parents went to residential school, and one of the things that they passed on to me was this fear or untrusting of people in positions of power, which includes police and doctors and teachers. So there's still a part of me that is not trusting, but I'm learning to get over it, and learning to I'm learning that everybody's there to help. As I said, I feel nurtured, I feel supported. I haven't had anything really negative to say about my experiences at York.
No, it's completely heartening to hear that the global element of the conversation that is happening around creativity, and then the fact that you're learning new, yay, it's good for a dean to hear that the courses are actually teaching you things that are new and different, and they're opening up your mind. One editorial comment would be, please don't lose that suspicion of authority.
Mhm.
I learned it in Buffalo. I
Mhm.
used to trust the police too until I lived in Buffalo, and then I learned not to.
Mhm.
And that'll be my segue to Chandra.
Oh, gosh. Uh, Overall, I have to say my experience has been really great as well. I think, like Terry said, I've been super supported by everybody that I've met in the department, and my advisors are all amazing. One thing also about my department, partly in thanks to the woman I mentioned, Deb, who got me to even apply, she was very instrumental in getting arts-based research methodologies to be really recognized and respected in our department. So that really works for me, because even though I'm mostly doing traditional Haudenosaunee food work, but I also bring a lot of art stuff to my work and for my comps. So it's a fabulous program to be in if you have kind of a wide range of methodologies that you want to utilize.
Right. That's a wonderful point, because I'm thinking one of the challenges of a university is that it's so big, and yet there are actually people doing arts-based research methodologies in strange places at the university. And it's the more you talk to your supervisors and students in other courses, the more you learn, oh, someone else, in English is doing an arts-based, material-based relation to poetics, say, and that person has a connection to fine arts, which has a connection to EUC. And it starts to sort of, in some way, shrink the university and broaden your possibilities. So, I mean, yeah, it's a great point to bring up about arts-based approaches.
I have one logistic though to share that may apply to folks. I'm not sure, and it probably didn't apply to Terry, but because I was born and raised in Buffalo, but my father's family was from Tyndonega, and so I went back and forth my whole life, across the Peace Bridge, sometimes daily, and lived in Fort Erie for a while. And I've been living on the so-called Canadian side as an adult for, I don't know, almost 25 years, just over here, and living at CISS for almost 20 years. So when it came to apply to the program, there was no box for me on the form. And so I had to go back and forth with them for a while, because I didn't want it to appear as I was misrepresenting myself, because I do and have lived in Canada on territory or off territory for quite some time now. So I figured out finally that my official designation, which is also for quite a number of people that I know from Six Nations and Tyndonega, is I'm a status Indian born outside of Canada, but live in Canada.
Correct.
Yep. So that's a really important distinction. If you're from Six Nations territories, but you're living in Canada, if you were born in the States. So there might not be a box for you. So you're going to have to go through that on your application sometime.
No, huge. See, that is so important for people in the audience to hear. And again, it reaffirms, if you don't understand, like, what do I do when there's no box? That's when you reach out to Eileen, you reach out to Tracy, just to help understand that you described it beautifully. Status, titled, living, or born, living, the crisscross around the border is, who would know this from an application?
Yeah, and not like, depending on where you're from, what territory you're from, you may or may not have to deal with that. But if you're someone who's crossed borders, your whole life, you may have different designations.
Yeah, no, thank you. And my sympathies on anyone crossing back and forth on the Peace Bridge.
Yeah, it's a
to-
while.
Lance, so your experience, what else to add beside all the sunshine and roses that we've been talking about?
Well, I started in my master's in September 2020, which we all know what that was like. All virtual.
Right.
I'm in the interdisc program, and that's a program I really enjoy because it's different from any other program. In interdisciplinary studies, you're not a dance major or a film major or a environmental study or law. You choose 3 different faculties and then you merge them together. So I have sociology, I have Indigenous studies, and I have social work, all from 3 different faculties, which is great. And academia really likes that when they're like, ooh, you think different because you merge different things. That's great. Except academia also problematizes that because social work doesn't want non-social work students taking their classes. Sociology doesn't want non-sociology, so they're favoring their own. So if you do interdisc, which I recommend, you really need, and this is what I did, I made sure that there's not even a grad program in Indigenous studies yet. So we had to create courses because there weren't any that existed that I could take. So I made sure that my 3 supervisors who are in each of these fields were very adamant and strong advocates. So even for the one social work course I took, it was week 5 before I was officially in the course of a 12-week course. So almost halfway through before I was officially in the course. But my supervisor was like, no, he needs to be in here and pulled all the strings. So that is another hurdle you might have to do, but I still recommend it because it's really interesting. And we're also a cohort of 18, and nobody at all was in Indigenous studies. Nobody else was doing sociology. I think one other person was doing social work. So everyone in my cohort was in these very different programs with very different projects. It was really interesting. And 2020, 2021 school year went fine. That was coursework. My plan was, plow through everything, get through everything. So the other recommendation I have as far as my experience, my other thought is, and this is something that comes from my elders when I was stressing, life happens and take the break. You don't have to finish it in 2 years if you need a deferral. And so fall of 2021, my mom was in ICU. So I flew back to Yellowknife and I was there for 6 weeks taking care of her, renovating her house. I was not doing my research project. I was helping to renovate her house so that she had more mobility and more accessibility in her house. I was helping prepare her house for winter because that comes a lot earlier in Yellowknife. Then I came back to Toronto and finally got my ethics done and was stressing because I was behind. And that's when my elders were like, you're not behind. When it's done, it's done. And, talk to your school. And all my profs were like, my supervisors were like, work with the school. Let's do it. And then last summer, my mom passed away in July. So she was in ICU again. And so when I was literally on the plane to Yellowknife, the day she went into ICU, I jumped on the plane and I just messaged my
Program
chair.
director?
Yeah. And the program and the coordinator. And I was just like, I'm going to need a deferral because if mom's out of the ICU, I'm going to need to take care of her. If she passes away, I'm not doing my research project right now. And by the time I landed in Yellowknife, the whole process was, and this was a weekend, the whole process was written out like, this is what you need to do, fill out this form, blah, blah, blah. And I finally got around to that and it was immediately approved. And so I'm actually technically not a student right now. I'm still on that deferral. And it was stressing me out because I'm like, no, I was supposed to be done. I was supposed to be graduated last year and I'm supposed to be done my PhD coursework by today, like now. And I'm behind. And my partner and my supervisors and everyone's just like, you're not behind. My elders, like, you're not behind. When you get it done, you get it done. And that's something I think that's really important to remember. York gives you these timelines. Your school's going to give you these timelines. but we lived through a pandemic. To some people, it's still going on. Some people thought it never happened, but it did. You have family stuff, you have children, you have dogs,
Yeah.
and that's more important than school. From an Indigenous perspective, maybe in your own cultures, it's not, but from an Indigenous perspective, school is all around us. That is something that we as Indigenous people need to recognize, that we need to also center ourselves and think about community and all these other things, as well as getting the next A+. So, and
Yeah.
York was really good for that. There wasn't a lot of, give us proof, do this, do that. Like, it was just very like, I need a deferral because this is going on. They're like, okay, done. So easily.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear about your mom, and I'm very happy to hear that some of the things we have tried to do to make the processes that you need flexible, like so that they can breathe as you need, that it actually worked. No jumping through hoops to take a leave. You need a leave, you take a leave. Good to hear, because we've been trying to make it more flexible for students. Every student will always be shown, here's the standard guideline of how things do things, how the degree functions. Important. Some people really value that kind of roadmap, but it is incredibly important to know that the Center for Indigenous Student Services exists to let you know what your options are. FGS exists to let you know what your options are. Your graduate program director is someone you can talk to, who will lay out the process for a leave, for instance, as happened with you. So it is important for people to know that a program can breathe as you need it. And that idea that you're behind, which we internalize, is really can become very destructive. And so this is a segue to a question that's come up in the chat about mental health, about burnout. Graduate degree, it's no surprise, graduate degrees are hard. And usually because your research ideas are interesting, or they're new, or they're boundary crossing. And as Lance just articulated, it puts a lot of responsibility on you to create that idea you're thinking. And so it's hard. Research is hard. Creating new things is hard. And there's a clock that if you listen to it ticking too much, you will not, everything can fall apart. So can we talk a little bit? Anyone can take this up. Have you felt, pressure that started to become destabilizing? And then what did you do? Who did you talk to? Did you know where to turn, etc.? That's a hard one to volunteer for, but if anyone wants to volunteer an answer, please do. Okay, Lance, yeah.
Similar to what I was saying earlier, for any, this panel is focused on Indigenous folks, but I know the audience is not entirely Indigenous. So, but remember supports like CISS, the Center for Indigenous Student Services, the Aboriginal or Indigenous Student Association at York. Those services exist, but also externally, you have places like, in Toronto at least, you have places like Anishinaabe Health and these different programs across Miswebeak that are culturally sensitive programs. But folks who are not Indigenous in the audience, like, there's Jewish community centers, Black community centers, South Asian community centers, and clubs and stuff at York. Being part of those really helps to, for me, it really helps to prevent burnout. Like my partner's white, so sometimes he doesn't understand some of the struggles I'm going through. So I sometimes just send Amy a WhatsApp message. So your friends in your network, just to help kind of recenter you. My supervisory committee is all Indigenous, and they're all traditional folks as well. So they help to understand that. The strange thing is my project is on language reclamation as a healing mechanism. And as soon as I started to need the healing, I walked away from my language acclamation. So, and it was a really weird thing. And one of my profs was like, this is what your research is about. This is what you're trying to prove. Why are you I'm like, oh, right, back to my classes. And then all of a sudden, oh, I'm feeling better. But I also go, check in with elders and healers on the regular. Not during the pandemic, obviously, but things like sweat lodge and stuff like that. Anything that you can use that you have access to in the city, or if you're an audience member from another territory, like check your city. There's friendship centers. There's something that might have access for you, and that to me is what really, really helps. And also having a committee, your committee that you select, if they're not supportive in those ways as well, they should be, I think. It'll make your role easier. But if they're not submitting, then fire them and find new ones that are going to support you in all ways, not just editing your thesis. Somebody that's going to support you throughout your entire journey, whatever that looks like.
It's a really good point that student supervisor relationship has to be healthy and not toxic. And if it is, and what students often don't think about is that they're in the driver's seat of that relationship. So you can, as Lance says, I'm not going to use the same language because I will fire your supervisor. But what it means is find somebody who can enable the process you need better. And somebody who is undermining you, attacking you, judging you negatively for the wrong reasons is not what you should stay with. And I have to stress it because some people should is a word that keeps pushing certain students to do things that they really don't have to do. Anyway, so it's related, I think, often to mental health, to challenges, burnout. Does anyone else want to, that was one question in the chat. I want to open it up to other questions that are coming from the audience, and Eileen and Anessa can help us with that. However, just before, if anyone wants to say anything more about anything on this one, please do.
I will. The way I'm taking what Lance is saying is you are your research. Like, to me, every day is a research. You are part of your research is how I look at it. If you're doing research on something that you're not personally involved in, then why are you doing it? Yeah. So if it's not something that is just a part of what you do and who you are. So in that sense, for me, COVID was a struggle, but as a mom, and as a homemaker, but since that is so much a part of who I am in my research anyway, maybe I didn't get a lot of writing done, but all of that living and being and thinking about that thing from that lens is still part of the research that I've been doing and will inform when I actually get the time to kind of get back at doing the writing, because I've been doing my comps. But one thing I was able to do because of my program and because of my advisors was I did a ton of artwork for my second comp. That was the one thing I was able to actually do and produce. Yeah. So I was able to do a lot of that, during COVID, which other than that, of course, was really difficult being like a primary caregiver for a whole lot of people, and having, again, speaking to what Lance said about your advisors, like all of my advisors are wonderful, but my main advisor, like, she was always more concerned with me and my well-being than with the work I was producing. Was always checking in with me. Are you doing okay? Do you need some time? Or just talking about whatever it was I was able to accomplish. So that relationship with whoever is on your committee, I think, is just going to be paramount to your overall success in the program.
Yeah. I see another topic question that's come in the chat related to that. How did you discover your research topics, each of you, and how has it changed? How has it developed? And I guess that really gets at the process of you're in grad school and you know what you want to do, but it often isn't a linear thing, and that what you want to do starts to change shape a little bit as you go through the process, which I think is positive because that's part of the learning. But so the question people were asking in the chat is, how did you come up with your research idea? And how has it changed? And maybe Terry, can I flip to you, because I haven't heard from you in a bit.
Yeah. In my undergrad, one of the texts that really influenced me was Walter Benjamin's The Age of Mechanical Reproduction. So that had, because for me, that was it made me question, well, first of all, one week we went in and they said, we're going to look at art. And it was just all Western European art. And I'm like, what was the rest of the world doing? They weren't just twiddling their thumbs. But then when I started to think, then we were assigned that text. And then I was like, okay. And I'm like, well, maybe did we specifically create objects for aesthetic purposes? Or did our objects have more of a functionality than aesthetics? Or maybe it's both. That's the main thing when I got out of undergrad, what had interested me. And I kind of came to York with that idea.
Mm-hmm.
But then it wasn't until I started to think, so I'd already written my script, my short film thesis film. And then I started to look at the themes that were in there, and it was about loss of language, loss of culture, intergenerational trauma. And then I was thinking, maybe this has something more to do with historical trauma. And I already studied in undergrad in writing class the works of Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart, who did her research, social work on historical trauma. And then I was like, so she had one, for what the thing was, but what was a quote that I used, but it was like, she says that healing can happen through historical trauma, and I put in brackets in film. So that's sort of like where then I started to review all the four prior coursework I did at Syracuse, and they all had the same colonization, lots of language. Like I had already been creating these this idea of historical trauma. So it was sort of was there the whole time. It was revealing itself. I just had to see it. And I feel so much better for it. It's more, now I feel like my research work is, of course, it's fun, even though a little bit on the mental health thing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's hard work and it's stressful, but at the same time, I'm like, but I'm having fun overall, I'm having fun while I'm doing it. And that's what's telling me I'm on the right path.
I love how it underscores just what Chandra said, though, about the importance of a kind of constant self-reflection, and that this is, I mean, you came to the idea by looking at what you had done and what your work was telling you about what you had done, and now you can see it in a different way. It's still very you, you know, in the research process. Well, Amy, how did you come upon what you wanted to do in your graduate studies? Because you have a different idea.
Yeah, so I actually had a completely different idea when I thought about applying to my master's program, but then I decided I wasn't going to do that for safety and political reasons. So I got to my master's program. It actually doesn't exist anymore. It's like, it was a 1-year program that only existed for 1 year. It wasn't actually a 1-year program. It was a 2-year program condensed into 1 year, and it doesn't exist. It existed for 1 year. But I rolled up to the first class, and they were like, okay, you need to have an abstract for your research project next week. So I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. I didn't know we were doing research projects because we were told it was a 1-year coursework master's, and then just kidding, no, it's a 2-year program condensed into 1 year. And there was a whole thing. So I just came up with something on the spot, and it was already speaking to some interests that I had, but like I didn't know how I would have articulated that because I hadn't planned, because I was told I didn't need to plan. So I was interested in a ballet about residential school by the Royal Winnipeg Ballet called Going Home Star. Yep. And I just wrote an abstract about how I was just gonna look at this ballet and I was gonna do blah, 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 whatever. And then I took that journey of researching that ballet because that's what I said I was going to do. So I guess I had to do it. Oh God, my dog's barking. But she escaped out the door. So
Look, she's not eating you. So
yeah, I gave her a treat. I thought she was fine. But anyway, yeah. So along that journey, I found that like Going Home Star was really just a case of a much larger Canadian phenomenon
Mhm.
of non-Indigenous people creating a Canadian identity through confronting Indigenous death. So that started, 1936 with Boris Volkoff and the Nazi Olympics, and he brought in works about Indigenous people to the dance festival or the dance competition. And then he was like, that's it, I'm making a Canadian dance company now. He's the founder of Canadian Ballet. Then there was George Riga, who did The Ecstasy of Rita Joe, which is about an Indigenous woman getting murdered, and he's the father of Canadian theater. And so there's this whole pattern, and I realized it was much larger. So it kind of found me along the way, where as I was digging deeper, I realized exactly what it was. So like I wrote my master's, whatever it was called, thesis, MRP. We didn't get to call it either of those things because like it just like, send us a paper now, immediately, in 2 weeks. So at the end of the 1-year program. So yeah, whatever it was, my thesis, I'll call it, because that makes me feel good about myself. Yeah, so that, and I realized it was much deeper than that. I went away, I became a death doula, so I learned about death and dying studies and all those kinds of things. And then I showed up to my PhD program. I had intended to expand larger, and it was just like, oh, sorry, I have to close the door because my partner's also in a meeting about something business related. Okay.
Perfect. I'm going to take the opportunity while you're doing that to remind everyone what I said at the beginning. Amy underplays herself because the difference of the extent of the research is really kind of fascinating, including becoming a death doula, including the historical research, including the knowledge you already have in terms of dance movement, and you're putting it all towards communication. It's to me, it's really interesting the more you talk about it.
I didn't realize people know who I am to the extent that they do until like I go into a Zoom like this and they're like, Amy, you do all these things. And I'm like, who are you? Just kidding, I know you. But yeah, so anyway, I got to my PhD and I realized there was so many steps that I needed to retrace back through my master's research because I'd only had 1 year and panic decided what I was doing. So I went back and I retraced all of these things that were questions that I still had, particularly about like the Russian or Eastern European identities of the people that were doing the majority of this like Indigenous death performance stuff and things like that. And like the ecstasy of Rita Joe was a big question that I had. So I went back and I found that, and then it was kind of sent me along on my trajectory from there to like really define exactly what my research project was. So it did really find me along the way. Another thing I wanted to say was I read this really cool book a bit too late. It was not a York professor that gave me this book. It was a TMU professor. Sorry, York. But it was called Where Research Begins by Thomas Mullaney and Christopher Wray. And it's a really, really easy read as well. It's like a small read. It's like very accessible, and it lays out everything you need to know about finding a research topic and research questions and building your project. Sorry, my dog is growling. And it was a really good book. So I do recommend that book, especially if you don't know what you want to research or you don't understand how to approach building a research project. That book was really good for that. I already had my whole project laid out when I read it, but it would have been really useful had I read it earlier.
No, it's a great resource, because people are asking. I'm seeing this is it's a persistent question. I mean, they have ideas, but they don't know how to turn it into research. And so sometimes reading, starting with an accessible resource is always good to have. Talking to people, very important. Listening to you and how it's a kind of self-reflexive, iterative process is also very important, because if one thing, audience, if you missed it, you can propose a research idea on paper for the application, but we don't necessarily hold you to that idea. We're looking for how your mind works in terms of proposing research, and we're admitting the student, we're admitting the mind. And your idea may change. We kind of hope it will change, especially in humanities and social sciences. Also in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines, we hope your ideas evolve, but there you're working with a team on usually an existing idea. that's, already there. In humanities and social sciences, where you're creating the research, we kind of hope it will develop. So don't get too stressed out about what is my idea. I have to get it perfect, because as Amy also just said, this will change. She wrote, she underplayed it as, I just wrote a thing about a thing, but obviously it demonstrated a thinking mind and a researcher's mind, and that's what we're going for. So don't feel like you need the perfect idea before you apply. No, you don't. Time is starting to run out, I'm seeing. Anessa, is there anything in the questions from the chat that you want to make sure we hear?
Tom, I think Lance just had something to add to Amy's point.
Oh, please. Yeah, sorry, Lance.
One advice I have that I was given, if you're in your undergrad and you're planning to do a PhD as well, so you need that master's, you'll need to do a thesis or an MRP usually. A lot of people gave me this advice and it's really great. Think about your dissertation, what your topic you want for your dissertation. Like Tom said, it can change, it will change, but think about that. Then your master's research project, make that a stepping stone. So mine's on language as healing. My dissertation for my PhD will be on culture and ceremony as healing. So they all kind of blend together. And that was the PhD program I want to apply to. They're like, do this. We won't look at it like it's easy. It's smart. And then the other thing is if you're a third-year student right now, and you're thinking about a master's, if you're a third-year undergrad, plan out your fourth-year coursework if you have electives in things that are going to be relevant, because you're going to get to know scholars, you're going to get to know authors, you're going to get to know stuff that is going to inform not just your thesis, your master's thesis or MRP, but also your application, because you need a lit review. So you don't have to do all that research aside. You're doing it in your fourth year. So my fourth year was really heavily on healing and language. I did 2 directed readings just to fill those needs, so that I already had a lot of that information. So the earlier you can plan, I get your ideas will change, but if you have the opportunity to plan, then make them stepping stones. It's a lot less work for you down the road.
I see. Yeah, Amy.
Sorry, I just wanted to punctuate that with when I was in first year undergrad with Patrick Alcedo. After my first semester, took a course with him. He sat me down. He's like, Amy, it's time for you to start thinking about your PhD. So it is. It really is. He was right.
Yes. But what a way to freak someone out too. It's like, however, it is the right time. One last thing I've seen in the chat before we say goodbye. Someone asked very pragmatically, how do you ask a professor for a letter of recommendation? And my response to this is, make sure it's a course where you're doing well, you like the professor, you like the topic, and you would value this person's recommendation. How do you ask them? You just ask them. You can send it by email, you can knock on the door in office hours. We expect it. We want it. We're actually, think of it that way. Your professor wants to know that you're interested in grad school. So ask any way you can, but do what Lance said, just not the way he said it. Approach us early, because you're not the only one asking us. So if you think that I can write 40 recommendations, if I'm teaching 300 and something students in 2 weeks, that can't happen. So I'm not doing justice to the recommendation I could give you if you don't give me a good amount of time. So plan early. It's why Patrick said to Amy in year 1, think about your PhD, because you want to be planning early. October is not a bad time to start asking a professor, talking about grad school, sharing your ideas. It only ever helps the letter. And then when the application process is coming due, December or January, the professor's letter is there in good time. So just a quick technical answer to that question. I have a feeling we're over time now, Eileen. Yes,
Yeah.
no?
Yes,
Wait.
a little bit. So we
Okay.
could wrap up now, but I mean, extraordinary content, so it's not a bad thing necessarily, but in interest of respecting time, yeah, we should wrap it up.
So just on behalf of everyone in the audience, which I wish I could see, I feel really bit blessed by the time and the content that you've given us today. Panelists, that was really rich. I thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I don't know that people would get that amount of information and very personally and honestly delivered. So I really thank you for that.